The large shopping mall was always cold, no matter what the weather was like outside. The air inside smelled like expensive perfume, fresh coffee, and the strong chemical scent of cleaning products. In the center of the huge hall, there was a grand piano. It was black and shiny, looking like a big, sleek car that had no wheels. It sat there quietly under the bright lights, waiting for someone who knew how to make it sing nearby. A woman in a blue uniform pushed a heavy cleaning cart. She moved slowly, but steadily. Her name was not important to the people walking past her. To them, she was just part of the background, like a potted plant or a trash can. She had a mop in one hand and a cloth in the other. Her eyes were focused on the floor, looking for specks of dust or footprints that needed to be wiped away. She had been working since the early morning, and her feet hurt, but she did not stop. A few feet away, sitting on a small metal bench, was a young girl. She was about 10 years old. She wore a faded pink sweater that was a little too big for her and jeans that had been patched up at the knees. She had her school bag open on her lap, and a thick textbook was resting against her legs, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes were fixed on the piano. She sat there every afternoon after school. While her mother cleaned the floors and emptied the trash cans, the girl waited. She was very quiet, so quiet that most people walked right past her without noticing she was there. She was used to being invisible. In this world of bright lights and expensive shops, a cleaning lady and her daughter did not really exist. They were the shadows that kept the shiny world clean. The afternoon rush was beginning. People started to fill the hall. They walked fast, carrying bags from famous brand stores. They talked loudly on their phones or laughed with their friends. The girl watched them all. She saw a woman in a fur coat drop a tissue on the floor. She watched her mother immediately walk over, pick it up, and throw it in the bin without saying a word. The woman in the fur coat didn't even look down. She just kept walking. The girl felt a small pinch in her chest, but it wasn't a new feeling. She knew how the world worked. There were people who shopped, and there were people who cleaned. She looked back at the piano. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It looked like a bridge to another place. Sometimes students from the rich music school nearby would come into the mall. They would sit at the piano and play. The girl would hold her breath every time the bench was pulled back. She watched their fingers dance across the black and white keys. She saw how they pressed the pedals with their feet. She listened to the sounds, sometimes fast and angry, sometimes slow and sad. The music would float up to the high ceiling and fill the whole building when the music played. The shoppers would stop for a second. They would smile and nod as if they understood the art, but the girl on the metal bench didn't just listen. She drank the music in. She closed her eyes and let the notes wash over her. In her head, she was not sitting on a hard bench in a noisy mall. She was somewhere else. She was the one playing. Her mother would sometimes look over and check on her. When she saw the girl watching the piano with such big eyes, the mother's tired face would soften. She knew her daughter loved the instrument. She knew the girl had a rhythm in her that she couldn't explain. But the mother also knew the reality of their life. A piano cost more than they earned in a year. Lessons cost more than their rent. So she just watched her daughter dream, and she went back to scrubbing the floor, trying to make the white marble shine even brighter. As the sun began to set outside, the lights inside the mall got brighter. The girl shifted her weight on the hard bench. She opened her textbook and tried to read a chapter about history. She tried to focus on the dates and the names of old kings, but the words were blurry. Her mind kept drifting back to the melody she had heard earlier that day. It was a complicated piece. A boy with messy hair had played it. He had made mistakes, stopping and starting, getting frustrated, and hitting the keys harder. But even with the mistakes, the girl had understood what he was trying to do. She had felt the pattern in her own fingers. She knew exactly which notes should have come next to fix the song. She sat on her hands to stop them from moving. She wanted to run to the piano and show him, or just show herself, that she knew how it should sound. But she didn't move. A security guard walked by. He looked at the girl, then at her mother working a few meters away. He didn't say anything mean, but he didn't smile either. He just tapped his baton against his leg and kept walking. It was a reminder. Don't touch. Don't make a mess. Don't cause trouble. The girl looked down at her own hands. They were small and rough from washing dishes at home and helping her mother sort recyclables. They looked nothing like the soft, clean hands of the people who usually sat at that piano. She rubbed her fingers together, imagining the touch of the ivory keys. She wondered if the piano would feel cold or warm. Her mother finished mopping a large section of the floor. The wet floor sign was put up, warning people not to slip. The mother wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her sleeve and walked over to the bench. She sat down heavily next to her daughter. "Is the homework hard?" the mother asked in a quiet voice. She spoke in their native language, soft and gentle. "No, it is okay," the girl answered, closing her book. "I am just looking." The mother looked at the piano. It was empty now. The shoppers were walking past it, ignoring it. It was just a piece of furniture again. The mother sighed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wrapped sandwich. It was a little squashed from being in her pocket all day. "Here," she said. "Eat. We have a long bus ride home." The girl took the sandwich. She wasn't really hungry, but she ate it because she knew her mother had saved half of her own lunch for her. As she chewed, she watched the reflection of the mall lights on the shiny black surface of the piano. It looked like a pool of dark water. "Can we stay for 10 more minutes?" the girl asked suddenly. "Please." The mother looked at her watch. She was tired. Her back hurt. She wanted to go home and soak her feet in hot water. But she saw the look in her daughter's eyes. It was a look of deep longing, a look that said, "This is where I belong." "Okay," the mother said softly. 10 minutes. But stay on the bench." The girl nodded. She wiped her mouth with a napkin and sat up straighter. She watched the crowd flow by like a river. She waited. She was hoping that someone else would come. Anyone who would play? Just one more song before the lights went down. For a moment, it seemed like no one would come. Then an older man with a gray beard walked past. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive, and he carried a briefcase. He stopped in front of the piano. He looked at it, checked his watch, and then looked around. The girl held her breath. The man placed his briefcase on the floor, opened the lid of the piano, and sat down. He didn't play classical music. He played a simple jazz tune. It was smooth and cool. The girl watched his left hand playing the low notes, the heartbeat of the song, and his right hand playing the melody. She saw the way his body swayed slightly, side to side. He was enjoying himself. The sound was different from what the students played. It was looser, freer. The girl found herself tapping her foot on the floor, in perfect time with the beat. She stopped quickly, afraid her mother would tell her to be quiet. But her mother just smiled a tiny, tired smile. The man played for about 5 minutes. A small crowd gathered. They took out their phones to record him. The girl didn't have a phone. She didn't need one. She was recording the music in her memory. She memorized the way his fingers crossed over each other. She memorized the specific sound when he pressed 3 keys at once. She closed her eyes and let the bass notes vibrate through the floor and up the legs of the bench. Right into her body. All too soon, the man finished. He hit a final chord, let it fade into silence, and then closed the lid. He stood up, picked up his briefcase, and walked away, accepting the quiet applause of the strangers. The piano was silent again. The girl looked at the digital clock on the wall high above. Their 10 minutes were up. "Time to go," her mother said, standing up slowly and groaning a little as her joints popped. The girl slid off the bench. She put her heavy bag on her back. She looked at the piano one last time. It was closed. It was sleeping. "I will play it one day," the girl whispered. She didn't say it loud enough for her mother to hear. She said it to herself, like a promise. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder. "Come, let's go home." They walked toward the exit. The girl walked a few steps behind her mother, just like she always did. As they reached the automatic glass doors that opened to the dark, cold street outside, the girl stopped and looked back. In the center of the hall, the piano sat alone in the yellow light. It looked lonely. It looked like it was waiting for someone to wake it up. The girl turned away and stepped out into the night air. She didn't know that tomorrow her life would change. She didn't know that soon the people who walked past her without seeing her would be rushing to hear her. For now, she was just the cleaner's daughter. walking home with her mother, carrying the music inside her like a secret treasure. The heavy doors slid shut behind them, sealing the quiet world of the mall away until the next day. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a month. The large shopping mall became a second home to the girl, but not in the way it was for the shoppers. For them, it was a place to spend money. For her, it was a classroom. It was a school with no teachers, no books, and no tuition fee, except for the price of silence and patience. Every afternoon, the routine was the same. The yellow bus would drop her off at the corner, and she would walk briskly to the side entrance where the employees went in. She would nod to the security guard who now recognized her face, and she would head straight to the atrium. Her mother would already be there, dressed in her blue uniform, her hair tied back tightly. Pushing the heavy cart across the smooth floor, the girl would take her place on the metal bench. She would take out her homework, but her mind was never on the math problems or the history dates. Her focus was entirely on the grand piano. Sitting in the middle of the open space, she began to notice things that other people missed. She noticed that the piano had a small scratch near the pedals, probably from someone's shoe. She noticed that the dust settled differently on the black surface, depending on the time of day. But mostly she noticed the music. The teachers in this invisible school were the people who sat down to play. They didn't know they were teaching her. They didn't know that a pair of dark, intense eyes was memorizing their every move. Some were arrogant students from the nearby music academy. They would play fast and loud, trying to show off. They would look around to see if anyone was clapping. The girl watched their hands. She saw how they lifted their wrists high when they played fast notes, and how they slammed their fingers down to make the music sound angry. Other players were different. Sometimes an old person would sit down. They would play slowly with a shaking hand. They didn't care about showing off. They played for the memory of the song. The girl loved these times the most. She watched how gently the old person touched the keys, as if they were afraid of hurting them. She learned that music wasn't just about noise. It was about touch. It was about feeling. Because she could not touch the piano herself, she built a piano in her mind. It was perfect. While she sat on the hard bench, her right hand would rest on her open school bag. Underneath the fabric, she would press her fingers down, one by one. She imagined the weight of the keys. She imagined the resistance. She practiced scales silently. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Her fingers would walk across the fabric of her bag. No one looked at her. To the people walking by, she was just a fidgety child waiting for her mother. But in her head, the sound was crystal clear. She could hear the notes ringing out as clearly as if she were striking the strings. Herself, her mother, watched this silent dance from a distance. At first, she didn't understand what her daughter was doing. She just saw the girl tapping her hand on her bag over and over again. But one afternoon, as the mother wiped a window near the bench, she realized what was happening. A young man was playing a song on the piano that went up and down the scale very fast. The girl's hand on her bag was moving at the exact same speed. They were perfectly in sync. The mother stopped wiping. She looked at the piano, then at her daughter's hand. A cold feeling washed over her. It was fear mixed with pride. She saw that her daughter had a gift. She saw that the girl understood the language of the music without ever speaking it. But she also knew that in their world, gifts like this were often buried under the need to survive. A piano was a dream. Food on the table was the reality. One rainy Tuesday, a new student came to play. He was tall and wore a fancy jacket. He placed a thick book of music on the stand. It looked difficult. The pages were covered in black notes, crowded together like ants. He started to play, but he kept stopping. He would play a few lines, make a face, curse quietly, and start again. He was struggling. The girl watched him closely. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his fingers. He was tripping over the same part every time. It was a jump from a low note to a high note. His hand wasn't moving fast enough, so the sound was blurry and messy. In her mind, the girl saw the solution. She imagined her own hand stretching. She knew exactly how far he needed to reach. She knew he needed to lift his thumb quicker. She sat on the edge of the bench, willing him to get it right. Lift your thumb, she thought in her head. Stretch. The boy tried again, and failed. He slammed his hands on the keys in frustration and stood up, leaving the music book open. He walked away to buy a drink, leaving the piano empty. The girl stared at the open book. She couldn't read the notes on the page. She didn't know the difference between a treble clef and a bass clef, but she knew the pattern. She had heard the melody in his attempt. She closed her eyes and played the song in her head perfectly. She fixed the messy part. She made the jump smooth. She added the feeling that he was missing. She wanted to run to the piano. She wanted to show the book that she could play what was written inside. But her feet felt like they were made of stone. The security guard was standing near the elevator. The staff-only sign seemed to be glowing at her. Her mother walked by with the mop cart. She saw the longing in her daughter's posture. She saw the girl leaning toward the piano, like a flower leaning toward the sun. The mother sighed. She knew she couldn't give her daughter lessons. She knew she couldn't buy her a keyboard. But she also knew she couldn't stop her from dreaming. Focus on your math, the mother whispered softly as she passed. Trying to bring her daughter back to earth, the girl blinked and looked down at her lap. She pulled her hand away from her school bag. The moment passed. The boy came back with a soda, sat down, and struggled through the song again. The girl listened, her heart beating a little slower now, resigned to being just a listener. As the months went by, the girl's internal world grew richer. She started to hear music in things that weren't musical. She heard a rhythm in the way the automatic doors swooshed. Open. Whoosh thump. Whoosh thump. She heard a melody in the sound of the espresso machine, steaming milk at the coffee. Cart, hi is SSS-pop, she began to hum softly. At first, she only hummed when the mall was noisy. But soon, she was humming all the time. It was a way to let the music out of her body so it didn't explode. She hummed while she helped her mother fold the cleaning rags. She hummed while she walked to the bus stop. One evening, her mother heard her humming a tune that was very complicated. It had high parts and low parts at the same time. "What is that song?" the mother asked. They were on the bus, riding home in the dark. The bus was noisy, but the mother could hear the tune clearly. "It is the one the man in the gray suit played on Monday," the girl said. "But I changed the ending." The mother looked at her daughter. The girl was looking out the window at the passing streetlights. Her face was calm. "You changed it?" the mother asked. "Yes. His ending was sad," the girl said simply. "I made it happy." The mother felt a shiver go down her spine. Her daughter was not just copying the music anymore. She was understanding it. She was rewriting it. The mother looked at her own rough hands, folded in her lap. She thought about all the money she saved in a jar hidden in their kitchen cabinet. It was for a new refrigerator. They needed a refrigerator badly. The old one made a loud noise and sometimes didn't keep the milk cold. She looked at her daughters. Profile in the window reflection? The girl was still humming. The melody was beautiful. It was light and airy, not heavy like the life they lived. The mother made a quiet promise to herself that night. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but she would find a way. She would find a way to let those fingers touch real keys, even if it meant they had to keep the old, noisy refrigerator for another 5 years. But for now, the education continued in the mall. The girl became a master of silence. She learned to control her breathing so she wouldn't make a sound. She learned to sit perfectly still so no one would ask her to move. She was like a statue with a beating heart. One afternoon, a famous pianist was visiting the city. There was a poster of him near the entrance. The girl didn't know who he was, but she saw the way people reacted when he walked into the atrium. They whispered. They pointed. They took out their phones. He was an older man with silver hair and a very kind face. He was not there to perform. He was just waiting for his car at the main entrance. But he saw the piano. He couldn't resist. He walked over, sat down, and played a melody that was so gentle, it made the girl want to cry. It wasn't a show-off song. It was a lullaby. The sound floated through the air like a soft cloud. The shoppers stopped walking. The noise in the mall seemed to lower. Everyone was listening. The girl watched his hands. They were wrinkled, but they moved with power and grace. She noticed that he didn't just hit the keys. He caressed them. He seemed to be squeezing the sound out of the instrument. He played for only 5 minutes. Then he stood up, bowed slightly to the silent crowd, and walked toward his car. As he passed the bench where the girl sat, he stopped. He looked at her. She froze. She was terrified that he would yell at her for staring, but he didn't yell. He looked at her hands, which were resting on her backpack, moving slightly. He looked at her face, which was wet with tears she didn't know she had shed. The day had been long and tiring, and the sun had already disappeared behind the tall buildings of the city. Inside the massive shopping mall, the atmosphere changed completely when the evening began. The bright, harsh lights were turned down slightly, making the place feel calmer and quieter. The loud music that played in the stores all day was finally switched off. The rush of hundreds of footsteps was replaced by the echoing sound of a single, cleaning cart moving across the smooth floor. Most of the shops were pulling down their metal shutters. The clerks were counting money in the back rooms. The customers had gone home to their families. The mall was no longer a place of excitement. It was a large, empty shell waiting to sleep. But for the girl and her mother, the work was not over yet. The mother was wiping the glass doors of the main entrance. She moved slowly, her shoulders slumped forward with exhaustion. She had been on her feet for 8 hours. Her back hurt, and her hands were dry and red from the strong cleaning chemicals she used all day. She looked over at her daughter, who was sitting on the metal bench as usual. The girl's school bag was open, but her books were ignored. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes locked on the grand piano in the center of the hall. "Are you hungry?" the mother asked softly, walking over to the bench. She sounded tired, her voice a little rough. "A little," the girl answered. She didn't look at her mother. She couldn't take her eyes off the piano. "Are you finished soon?" "Not yet," the mother sighed. She leaned against her cart for a moment. "I have to clean the bathrooms on the second floor. It will take me about 30 minutes. The girl's heart skipped a beat. The bathrooms on the second floor were far away. They were around the corner and down a long corridor. It would be the first time in months that she would be left completely alone in the main hall. "Okay," the girl said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I will wait here." "Stay on the bench," the mother warned, pointing a finger gently. "Do not run around. The security guard is watching the cameras." "I know," the girl said. "I will just sit here." The mother pushed her cart toward the elevators. The girl watched her go. She watched the cart disappear around the corner, and then she heard the ding of the elevator arriving. The heavy doors slid open and then shut. Silence returned to the hall. The girl looked around. The huge space was empty. There was no one playing the piano today. There was no one walking by. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning system high above in the ceiling. It felt like she was the only person in the world. She looked at the instrument. It stood there in the dim light, looking mysterious and beautiful. The lid was open. Earlier in the day, a piano tuner had come to fix a sticky key. He had left the lid up, and now the black and white keys seemed to be glowing in the soft light. They were inviting her. They were calling to her. The girl looked at the security desk at the far end of the hall. The guard was not there. He had probably walked to the break room to get a cup of coffee. The coast was clear. Her hands began to shake. She rubbed them on her jeans to dry the sweat. She had a burning feeling in her chest, a mix of excitement and fear. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. She had played the piano in her head thousands of times, but she had never actually touched it. She stood up. Her legs felt weak, like jelly. She took a step, then another. It felt like she was walking on the moon. The floor seemed to stretch out forever. Every step took a lot of effort. She was terrified that at any second, a loud alarm would go off, or a voice would shout at her to stop. But nothing happened. She got closer. The piano looked bigger now. It was a monster of wood and wire. She could smell the dust and the faint scent of old wood. She walked around the bench. It was a leather bench, polished and smooth. She reached out with one hand and let her fingers hover over the keys. She was afraid to touch them. They looked so fragile, yet so powerful. She took a deep breath. She looked around one last time. The hall was empty. The mother was far away. The guard was gone. It was just her and the music. She sat down on the bench. It was firm and comfortable. She was higher up than she expected. She looked down at her hands resting on her knees. They looked small and brown against the black, shiny wood of the piano. She felt a sudden wave of shyness, even though no one was watching. She felt like she was intruding on a private party. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her right hand. She moved it toward the keyboard. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, like a drum. Thump, thump. Thump dash thump. Her fingers touched the white keys. They were cool to the touch. Smooth. Hard. It felt like touching a piece of polished ice, but it was warmer than ice. It felt alive. She pressed down on a single note. It was the note right in the middle of the keyboard clang. The sound was not loud, but it was clear. It rang out in the empty hall and bounced off the high ceiling. The girl froze. She waited for the shouting to begin. She waited for the guards to come running. But the sound just faded away into the silence. A smile appeared on her face. It started small and then grew wider. She had done it. She had made a sound. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She pressed another key, then another. She played a simple tune, the one she hummed to herself every night. Do, re, mi. Under her fingers, the notes were different than they were in her head. They were richer. They vibrated through her fingers and up her arm. She could feel the wood of the piano trembling against her legs. She forgot about the fear. She forgot about the security cameras. She forgot that she wasn't supposed to be there. She closed her eyes, and the empty mall disappeared. She was no longer a poor girl in a faded sweater. She was a queen. She was a bird in the sky. She placed her left hand on the low notes and her right hand on the high notes. She remembered a song she had heard a student play last week. It was a fast, happy song. The student had messed it up, but the girl knew how it should go. She took a deep breath and let her fingers fly. Suddenly, the quiet hall was filled with music. It was clumsy at first. Her fingers were stiff and not used to the weight of the keys. She hit a wrong note, a sour sound that made her wince. But she didn't stop. She kept playing. She corrected the mistake and kept going. The music grew louder. It was like a river that had been held back by a dam and finally broke free. All the months of listening, all the days of watching, all the nights of humming in her head, it was all coming out now. Her hands moved faster and faster. She didn't need to look at the keys. She knew where they were. She had watched them for so long that the map of the keyboard was burned into her memory. She played with passion. She hit the keys harder than she should have, putting all her anger and her sadness and her joy into the sound. The piano sang. It roared. It cried. The girl was swaying back and forth, her eyes still closed, her hair flying around her face. She didn't hear the elevator ding again. She didn't hear the footsteps coming back from the hallway. She was lost in her own world, a world where the only thing that mattered was the music. She played a complex run of notes, her thumb tucking under her fingers just like she had seen the professionals do. It worked. The sound flowed like water. She felt a rush of adrenaline so strong it made her dizzy. She was doing it. She was really doing it. She thought about her mother scrubbing floors. She thought about the cold bus rides. She thought about the gold candy the kind man gave her. She poured all those feelings into the song. The music changed. It became sadder, deeper, more emotional. It was a story of a hard life, but a life filled with hope. The sound echoed through the mall, reaching up to the skylights and down to the basement. It was a sound that demanded to be heard. It was a sound that said, "I am here. See me?" She played on and on. Her fingers began to hurt, but she didn't care. She didn't want to stop. She felt like if she stopped, the magic would end, and she would just be the cleaner's daughter again. She wanted to stay in this moment forever, where she was powerful and free. She played the last few notes of the song, building up to a big finish. She brought her hands down hard on the keys, creating a loud, thundering chord that hung in the air for a long time. Then she lifted her hands off the keyboard. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The girl sat there breathing hard, her chest heaving up and down. She slowly opened her eyes. She looked down at her hands. They were red and trembling. She looked at the keys. They were still vibrating slightly. She smiled to herself. She had done it. She had touched the dream. She was about to play another song, a quiet one this time, when she realized something. The silence wasn't just empty anymore. It was filled with something else there. Standing near the pillar, just a few meters away, was a man. He was holding a briefcase. He was wearing a suit. He wasn't a security guard. And behind him, another person was standing. And another. They had come out of the shops. They had come from the elevators. The girl froze. Her heart stopped. She had been caught. She quickly pulled her hands back and hid them in her lap. She looked at the floor, waiting for them to yell. But they didn't yell. They were just standing there, staring at her. They were looking at her like they had seen a ghost. Or maybe like they had seen an angel. The girl didn't know it yet, but her life had just changed forever. The secret was out. The music had spoken. The girl froze on the bench. Her hands were pulled into her lap, hiding under the sleeves of her oversized sweater. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might jump right out of her chest. She looked at the floor, terrified. She knew she had broken the rules. She had touched the expensive piano. She had made noise. She was just the cleaner's daughter. And she had taken something that didn't belong to her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the shout. She waited for the security guard to grab her arm. She waited for her mother to come running and scold her in front of everyone. The silence in the hall was heavy, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the sound of her own breathing and the blood, rushing in her ears, but the shout never came. Instead, a slow sound started. It was the sound of hands clapping. The girl opened one eye just a tiny bit. The man in the suit was clapping. He had a strange look on his face. His mouth was open a little, and his eyes were wide. He wasn't clapping politely like people do when a song is done. He was clapping loudly with enthusiasm. He was clapping as if he had just seen a miracle. Then, another sound joined in. More clapping. It was coming from the corridor. Suddenly, the quiet hall was not quiet at all. A group of people came rushing around the corner. There were about 10 of them. They were dressed differently than the usual shoppers. The men wore tuxedos with shiny bow ties, and the women wore long, sparkling gowns. They looked like they had just walked out of a fancy party from a movie. They were moving fast, their expensive shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. They were led by an older man with silver hair and a black coat that looked very expensive. He looked like a king or maybe a strict professor. He was walking so fast that the others had to hurry to keep up with him. They all looked excited. They were looking around, searching for where the music had come from. When they saw the girl sitting alone on the piano bench, the whole group skidded to a halt. It was like they had run into an invisible wall. The silence came back, but it was shocked silence. The man in front, the older man with the silver hair, stared at the girl. He looked at the piano, then back at her. He had expected to see a professional pianist. He had heard a complex, difficult piece being played with deep emotion. He had rushed over because he thought a famous virtuoso was giving a late-night concert instead. He saw a small child in a faded pink sweater. He saw a girl with messy hair and worn-out jeans. He saw a school bag resting against the leg of the grand piano. "Who?" The older man started to speak. His voice was deep and strong, but it was shaking slightly. "Who was playing?" The girl didn't answer. She pressed herself back against the piano, trying to disappear. She wished she was invisible again. The man took a step closer. He didn't look angry. He looked amazed. "Was it you?" he asked. "Did you play that song?" The girl looked up at him. He was very tall and he looked scary, but his eyes were kind. She slowly nodded her head. She couldn't find her voice. A murmur went through the group of people behind him. They whispered to each other. They looked at her small hands, and then at the big piano. It seemed impossible. The music they had heard in the hallway was powerful. It was the kind of music that took years of practice to learn. This girl looked like she should be in elementary school, not in a concert hall. That piece, a woman in a blue dress stepped forward. That was the sonata. The difficult part in the middle, you played the runs perfectly. Who is your teacher? The girl looked down at her shoes. She didn't know what a sonata was. She didn't know what runs meant. She just knew the tune. I don't have a teacher, she whispered, so quietly that almost no one heard. What did she say? The older man asked. He leaned closer. The girl took a deep breath. She spoke a little louder. I don't have a teacher. I listen. The group of musicians stared at her in total disbelief. They looked at each other. They had spent their entire lives studying music. They had gone to expensive schools. They had practiced for 8 hours a day since they were 5 years old. And this girl, with no teacher, was playing music that most college students couldn't handle. Just then, the elevator doors at the far end of the hall opened. The girl's mother stepped out, pushing her heavy cleaning cart. She was looking down at her list of chores. She looked tired and ready to go home. Okay, my love, she called out, not looking up yet. I am finished. We can catch the bus now. She looked up. She stopped pushing the cart. The mother saw the crowd of people in fancy clothes. She saw her daughter sitting on the piano bench, surrounded by strangers. She saw the cameras coming out. She saw the cell phones being raised to record. Panic flashed across the mother's face. She abandoned the cart and ran forward. She pushed her way through the group of finely dressed people. She didn't care who they were. She only cared about her child. I am sorry, the mother cried out. She reached the piano and put a protective arm around the girl's shoulders. I am so sorry. She didn't mean to cause trouble. We are leaving right now. The girl stood up, her head down. She felt the shame burning her cheeks. She knew it. She had ruined everything. The mother tried to pull the girl away. Come on, let's go. Wait, a voice boomed. The mother stopped. It was the older man with the silver hair. He had stepped in front of them, blocking their way. He held up his hand to stop the mother from leaving. The mother looked at him, frightened. Please, sir. I am just the cleaner. She is just a child. She didn't know better. We won't do it again. The man's face broke into a wide smile. He laughed gently. He reached out and took the mother's rough, calloused hand in his soft, well-manicured one. My dear lady, he said, you misunderstand. We are not angry. We are stunned. The mother looked confused. She looked at the other people. They were all smiling now, nodding their heads. We heard the music from the hallway, the man explained. I am the conductor of the city symphony. These are my musicians. We were leaving a banquet when we heard the piano. I truly thought one of the great masters was in here performing. He looked down at the girl. And it was her? The girl looked up, her eyes wide. The symphony. Yes, the conductor said. We rushed over because the music was beautiful. It was raw, but it was full of genius. And you say you have no teacher? The girl shook her head. I just watch and listen. In my head, I play it. The conductor looked at the mother. How long has she been doing this? The mother looked down at her daughter. She stroked the girl's hair. Since she was a baby, she loved sounds. Since she started coming here with me, she watches the piano. She has never had a lesson. We cannot afford. We don't have much. Silence in the hall was different now. It was filled with respect. The wealthy people in the expensive clothes looked at the cleaner and her daughter with new eyes. They saw the struggle. They saw the love. They saw the diamond hidden in the rough dust of the shopping mall. Do you know what you have? The woman in the blue dress asked the mother. Do you know how rare this is? The mother shook her head. She just knew her daughter had a good ear. She didn't know it was something the world would want. Play for us again, the conductor said to the girl. Please, just one more song. This time, we will listen properly. The girl looked at her mother. Her mother was still scared, but she saw the kindness in the conductor's eyes. She saw the excitement in the crowd. Slowly, the mother nodded. She squeezed the girl's shoulder. It is okay, she whispered. The girl sat back down on the leather bench. The crowd moved closer. They formed a semicircle around the piano. Some of them sat on the floor. The security guard had come back, but he didn't say anything. He stood in the back, watching with his arms crossed, a proud look on his face. The girl placed her hands on the keys. They were still trembling a little, but not from fear this time. They were trembling with energy. She thought about the people watching her. She thought about the conductor, the musicians, her mother. She closed her eyes. She blocked them all out. She didn't play to show off. She played for the joy of it. She started to play. This time, it was a gentle, flowing melody. It was like a river moving over smooth stones. The sound filled the hall, sweeter and clearer than before. The conductor closed his eyes and swayed. The musicians nodded, recognizing the skill. The mother stood by the cart, wiping a tear from her eye with the sleeve of her blue uniform. She wasn't seeing a dirty mall or a piano she couldn't touch. She was seeing her daughter flying. When the girl finished, the hall erupted. It wasn't just clapping this time. It was cheering. The people in tuxedos and gowns were whistling and applauding like crazy. The girl sat there, blushing, but this time she didn't hide. She looked at them, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like the most important person in the room. The conductor walked up to the piano and leaned on it. He looked at the mother with a serious expression. "This cannot end here," he said firmly. "A gift like this belongs in a conservatory, not in a shopping mall. She needs a real piano. She needs a teacher." He looked at the girl. "Would you like that? Would you like to learn how to read the music? How to make your hands even stronger?" The girl looked at her mother, then back at the conductor. She felt a spark light up inside her chest, brighter than the mall lights. "Yes," she said. Her voice was clear and strong. "I would like that very much." The applause in the hall slowly died down, but the energy in the air felt like electricity. The girl sat on the piano bench, her hands resting on her knees, feeling the heat in her cheeks. She looked up at the conductor, then at her mother. The reality of what just happened was starting to sink in, but it still felt like a dream. A few minutes ago, she was just a child waiting for a bus ride home. Now, she was the center of attention. The conductor turned to the mother. He was serious now, his expression kind, but firm. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. It was simple, with just a name and a phone number printed in black ink. "Madame," he said, holding out the card, "I know this is sudden. I know it is late. But I cannot let this night end without a promise. This child, she has a gift that is 1 in a million. It would be a crime against music if we let that talent wither away in a shopping mall." The mother hesitated. She looked at the card, then at the man's expensive shoes, and finally at his eyes. She was used to people looking down on her. She was used to being told to move, to clean up, to be quiet. But this man was looking at her with respect. "What do you want from us?" the mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We have no money. I work cleaning. We live in a small apartment. I cannot pay for lessons." The conductor smiled gently and shook his head. "I do not want your money. Music does not care about money. It only cares about talent. I run a conservatory across the city. It is a school for music. We have a program for students with exceptional talent who cannot afford the fees. I want her to be in that program. I want to give her a scholarship, a full scholarship." The mother gasped. She put a hand over her mouth. A scholarship? A full scholarship. It was a word she had only heard in movies. It meant books, teachers, and a future. It meant her daughter wouldn't have to clean floors. But the conductor continued, "She must be willing to work. It will be hard. She will have to practice every day. She will have to study theory and history. It is not just playing. It is a discipline." The girl stood up. She looked at her mother. She saw the tears welling up in her mother's eyes. She didn't care about the hard work. She didn't care if she had to practice 10 hours a day. She just wanted to play. "I will work hard," the girl said clearly. Her voice didn't shake. "I promise." The conductor nodded. "Could call me tomorrow morning? We will make the arrangements." With that, The group of musicians began to pack up their things. They patted the girl on the shoulder as they left. Some of them smiled at her mother. The atmosphere in the mall had completely changed. The grand piano was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was the place where a miracle happened. The mother took the card with both hands, holding it as if it were made of gold. She looked at her daughter, and for the first time in a long time, the worry lines on her forehead seemed to smooth out. She pulled the girl into a tight hug. "Did you hear that?" The mother whispered into the girl's ear. "A school. A real school, I heard," the girl whispered back. They gathered their things. The mother pushed the heavy cleaning cart back toward the staff room, but she walked differently now. She didn't trudge. She walked with a bounce in her step. The security guard opened the side door for them and gave them a salute. "See you tomorrow," he said. "Congratulations." The girl and her mother stepped out into the cool night air. The city was loud, with cars honking and people rushing, but the girl felt like she was walking in a bubble of silence and joy. They walked to the bus stop. They didn't talk much. They just held hands. On the bus ride home, the girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder. She watched the streetlights flash by, turning the dark windows into frames of light. She thought about the conservatory. She imagined a room full of pianos. She imagined shelves full of sheet music. She imagined teachers who would tell her the names of the notes she already knew. In her heart, when they finally got to their small apartment, it was late. The apartment was humble. The furniture was old, and the walls were thin. But tonight, it felt like a palace. The mother put the white card carefully on the kitchen table, right next to the empty plate from dinner. She looked at it for a long time. "This changes everything," she said softly. She looked at the girl. "You will not have to struggle like I did. You will fly." The girl hugged her mother again. "I will never forget the piano in the mall," she said, "and I will never forget you letting me sit there." That night, the girl fell asleep instantly. But her sleep was not empty. In her dreams, she was playing on a giant stage. There were thousands of candles, and everyone was quiet, listening to her music. The next few days passed in a blur. The mother made the call in the morning. The conductor was true to his word. He didn't just talk, he acted. By the end of the week, the paperwork was done. It was a whirlwind of meetings and introductions. The girl had to play for a few other teachers at the school to prove her talent. She was nervous, but as soon as she touched the piano, the fear went away. She played the same song she played in the mall, and the teachers sat with their mouths open. They accepted her immediately. 2 weeks later, the girl walked through the front doors of the conservatory for her first official day. It was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and marble floors. The air smelled of wood polish and old paper. It smelled like history. Her mother walked with her, holding her hand tightly. The mother was wearing her best clothes, a simple dress she had saved for special occasions. She felt out of place among the other parents, who wore expensive suits and coats. But when she looked at her daughter's face, she felt strong. A kind teacher met them in the hallway. She led them down a long corridor lined with portraits of famous composers. The girl's eyes went wide. She recognized some of the faces from books. Finally, they stopped in front of a door. The teacher opened it. Inside, there were 5 pianos. 5 real, beautiful grand pianos, all lined up in a row. The sunlight streamed in through the large windows and danced on the shiny black surfaces. The room was full of music. The sound of students practicing in other rooms drifted in, creating a chaotic but beautiful symphony of noise. "Go ahead," the teacher said with a smile. "This is your classroom now." The girl walked in slowly. She felt like she was walking into a church. She walked up to the piano in the center. It was taller than her. She sat down on the bench. It was adjustable and spun around. She giggled a little, spinning herself in a circle. She placed her hands on the keys. This piano felt different than the one in the mall. It was even better. The sound was richer, deeper. She pressed a key and a note rang out, pure and clear. She started to play. It wasn't a song she knew. It was just a feeling. It was a song of gratitude. She played for her mother, who was standing in the doorway wiping away a quiet tear. She played for the conductor who had given her this chance. She played for the security guard and the shoppers who had ignored her. The teacher nodded to the mother and gently closed the door, leaving the girl alone in her new world. Months went by. The girl worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Her fingers grew strong and fast. She learned to read the black dots on the page. She realized that the dots were just maps to the places she had already been in her imagination. She learned about Bach and Mozart and Chopin. She realized that she wasn't just playing notes. She was telling stories. She still took the bus to the conservatory, but she didn't sit in the back anymore. She sat by the window, watching the city, thinking about music. Her mother still worked cleaning, but she worked with a lightness in her heart. She knew her daughter was safe. She knew her daughter was doing what she was born to do. One evening, 6 months after that first night in the mall, the conservatory held a small recital. It was for the new students. The hall was filled with parents and friends. The lights were dimmed. The girl walked out onto the stage. She was wearing a simple white dress. She felt the spotlight hit her face, blinding her for a second. She couldn't see the audience clearly, but she knew her mother was in the front row. She sat at the grand piano. She took a deep breath. She was nervous, but it was a good nervousness. It was the feeling of a bird ready to take flight. She began to play. The piece was difficult, fast, and energetic. Her fingers flew across the keys like spiders running on water. She didn't miss a note. She didn't hesitate. She put all her soul into the music. She thought about the cold nights, the hard floors, and the kindness of strangers. She poured all of it into the song. The audience was silent. They were captivated. They saw a small girl, but they heard a giant spirit. When she hit the final chord and lifted her hands, the silence lasted for a split second before the room exploded with applause. It was a thunderous sound. It was louder than the mall, louder than the bus, louder than anything she had ever heard. The people stood up. They clapped and cheered. The girl stood up and bowed. She looked out into the lights, right where she knew her mother was sitting. She saw her mother clapping, the hardest of all, crying happy tears. Proud of the girl who sat on the metal bench, the girl smiled. It was a bright, beautiful smile. She knew she wasn't the invisible cleaner's daughter anymore. She was a musician. She had found her voice, and the world was finally listening. And as she walked off the stage, she knew that this was just the beginning.